Skillshare is for designers, photographers, marketers, artists, and lifelong learners. Skillshare is for foodies, commuters, risk takers, the young, and the young at heart. It's for strategists, free spirits, purists, the bold, the curious, the characters, the makers, and the breakers. Skillshare is for everyone, an online learning community with thousands of classes to advance your career, improve the world, and pursue the work you love. What will you learn next? It all starts on Skillshare.
So to remind you about our discussion about verbs that we had in the section on parts of speech, verbs describe actions, and they do a few other things, but in this slide we'll just take a look at the actions that verbs can describe, and they're many and varied. The asteroid destroyed the dinosaurs. Babe Ruth swung for the bleachers. He runs marathons. They arrive on the flight from Chicago. I went to Cancun for my vacation. You hide and I'll try to find you. Can you show me the way to Tipperary? So, so these are actions that are described by verbs. In the next slide, we'll review very quickly some of the other aspects of a verb. Remember that the action that a verb describes does not have to be an action movie action. That is, it doesn't have to be destroying or running and jumping or fighting or doing any of these other things that we like to see in our movies. It could be a quiet, a still action. So she decided on chicken for the reception dinner. I think I'll have another beer. He felt a draft, or Superman slept like a baby. All these are quiet actions, but they're actions nonetheless. So these are other actions that verbs express. And in the next slide, we'll take a look at another function of the verb, which doesn't have to do with action at all. Remember that verbs can also express the state of being. So as we see over here, a few examples. I am a teacher. That was a great movie. You were a beautiful baby. This has been a lovely experience. So each one of those forms of the verb to be is a verb. And they express a state of being, not an action. And in the next slide, very quickly, we'll review other forms of the state of being verb. So there's other verbs that express the state of being besides the verb to be, and we see them listed here. He appears strong. I have become sadder but wiser. At least I think I'm wiser. It feels strange. Okay. She has grown tall. She's grown quite tall. She looks like a formidable opponent. This has proven difficult. That remains to be seen. He seems distracted somehow. The milk smells sour. Their music sounds like cats fighting, which is more and more my response to modern music, but I guess my music taste stopped developing around the time of the Beatles. Anyway, but now for each one of these, you could substitute the verb to be. He appears strong, he is strong. She has grown tall, she is tall. This has proven difficult, this was difficult. So in that sense, they express states of being and not action, but they're verbs nonetheless. So after that review, which I hope has been helpful, we get to the main point of this lesson is verb tense. In other words, verbs tell time. And that's what tense refers to. Tense refers to the ability of verbs to tell time. And in English, there are 6 different verb tenses, well, what we'll call tenses. Sometimes grammarians and linguists refer to aspect or mood of the verb, but we'll stick with the simpler term of tense. And so we have some examples here. I was, you will be, she has been, we will have been, they had been. You see, so each one of these casts the action, or in this case the state of being, into a different verb tense, into a different time. So we'll take a look at how this happens. So here we have the 6 tenses, in English. Not all languages have the same tenses, or think of verb tense or the time that that verbs describe the same way. But in English, this is the case. So we have the present, past, and future, and those are simple enough, and we'll be talking about those. We also have what's called the perfect tenses, the present perfect, past perfect, and the future perfect. And as we go forward, I'll break those down, one by one, and we'll take a look at what they are and what they do. So first we'll encounter the simple present tense, such as I have listed over here. I read, you sleep, she works, they eat. Now, one of the things that you'll notice almost immediately, and the English throws a curveball at us immediately, the simple present tense is not used to communicate present action. So, for instance, if I say I read, I'm not saying that I am reading right now. I say that I mean that I read regularly. You sleep does not mean that you're sleeping right now. It means that you sleep at night, perhaps. She works does not mean she is working right now. It means that she has a job. She works regularly at something. And again, they eat does not mean that they are eating right now. It means that to sustain themselves, they are in the practice of eating, as we all are. So the simple present tense is used not to communicate present action, but to communicate a sort of habitual state. And it has another function as well that I'll talk about. But first I want to take a little digression in the next slide, and I'll talk about how we do express present action. So English doesn't do us any favors by confusing the whole issue about the present tense, because it's not the present tense, as I said above, that communicates present action, but a form called the progressive. That's the ing form, and so I have some examples here that that show you what that is. So I am doing, she was doing, they have been doing, I am going to school, Mary is working right now. So just take a look at one of those. So for instance, what would be the difference? What kind of difference would you hear between I am going to school and I go to school? You see, so if I say I am going to school, that communicates to you that I'm in the action right now. I'm in the course of traveling to school. Okay. If I say I go to school, that means I go to school regularly. I am attending school. You see, so there's a difference there, and it's that difference that makes the difference between the present tense and the progressive. Back to the present tense. In English, the simple present communicates continuing or habitual action. And I'll just give you a few examples so that becomes more clear. So I could say, as I said before, I go to school. I go to school at State University. Mary works at the coffee shop. That dog barks all night. So you see, that dog barks all night. I mean, that's not even at the present time. I mean, that's just something, the dog continually does at night. And right now it's, in the middle of the day. So the dog's not doing it now. I'm not even saying that the dog is doing it now. I'm just saying that habitually, continually, every night, the dog barks and keeps me awake. My kids worry me to death. It's just something that they do all the time. So that's something to remember about the present tense. It doesn't communicate present action. It communicates habitual or continual action, and it does something else which is even more confusing, and we'll see about that in the next slide. So the present tense verb not only describes an action that is habitual by individuals, by people, but also scheduled or naturally reoccurring events, such as the sun rises in the east. The elections are held in November. The geyser in Yellowstone National Park shoots up more than 100 feet. Americans celebrate Independence Day on July 4th. Einstein discovered that matter and energy are intrinsically related. So they are intrinsically related. So, and of course, and you'll see in each one of these cases, I've highlighted in red the present tense verbs that describe these eternal events, and that's another function of the present tense. And as we go forward, we'll discover yet even another more confusing aspect of the present tense verb. So, little cliffhanger there. So the present tense also communicates an action or a state of being that is scheduled or expected to happen in the future. So the present tense is also used to communicate the future, which seems to be contradictory, because if it's the present, how come we're talking about the future? But that's just the way it is. So take a look at some of the examples here. The sun rises tomorrow at 6 a.m. We have a test next Tuesday. This computer is going into the shop tomorrow. My son has messed around with it enough. He's trying to improve it, and now it doesn't work at all. This has actually happened. So it is going into the shop tomorrow. The geyser erupts at 3 p.m. today. Independence Day is on a Tuesday this year. So you see, each one of these cases, I've used the present tense verb to indicate something that will happen in the future, something that's scheduled or are expected to happen in the future. And that's a usage of the present tense verb. Now, in the next slide, we'll go on to the next tense that we have to talk about, which is the future tense. And you'll see how that's related to what we're talking about here. So I'll see you in the next slide. After all my palaver about the present tense not being used to describe present action, there are actually a couple exceptions to that, and I'll describe them here. One is the event present. That is, for instance, if you're narrating a ball game and you say, Rodriguez makes the goal, yay! You're using the present tense, makes the goal. Or if you're just standing on the train tracks, if anybody, well, I hope you're not standing on the train tracks, but by the train tracks, in the train station, here she comes now. Okay, so somebody you're waiting for is coming. Okay, so here she comes. So that's one exception to the rule that the present tense does not describe present action. The other is the performative present, such as I now declare you man and wife. That I declare. You see, that's present action. Or I apologize for hurting your feelings. See, that's also present action. And there's one other exception, and that's the experiential. That's I feel a draft. Notice that's the simple present. I feel a draft. I hear a song. No, somebody's singing. I hear a song. I hear someone singing. Okay, or I see you. You know, I mean, like you play with a baby, right? You don't say I am seeing you. I'm seeing you. You know, you say I see you. I see you, or something like that. But these are exceptions to the use of the present tense, in which the present tense does actually describe present action. Now we come to the future tense. This is the tense in which we essentially predict the future. Now, just a side note, linguists and grammarians sometimes argue that English doesn't really have a future tense and that the verb itself doesn't change, which indeed it doesn't. But we employ a helping verb or a modal auxiliary. But that cavil, that little picayune point, won't bother us. We'll just refer to this as the future tense. Anyway, so, and as I said, we do use the helping verb will. So as we see in the examples over here, he will go to the party this weekend. My sister will graduate in June. I will definitely watch the last episode of Desperate Housewives, or whatever's most popular these days. Wilbur will show up for work tomorrow. Bobby McGee will bungee jump off the Tallahatchie Bridge. Okay, so these form some sort of expectation about the future. Now, you know what happens in English. Some languages don't have this kind of future tense. In English, we are able to say very definitively what is going to happen in the future. This isn't so in all languages. In some languages, you would say something like he would jump, or if he would jump, or something like that. People are a lot less sure about what's going to happen tomorrow or next year. But in English, we're very sure, and so we state the future as will. It will happen. Okay, so anyway, so we'll go on, and we will, okay, take a look at other possibilities for the future tense. Another possible way to express the future is using the form of going to. Very often coming out in colloquial English as gonna, as in I'm gonna go to the ball game tomorrow. Now will, the modal auxiliary will, the helping verb will, and the phrase going to can often be interchanged, such as we see over here, I'm going to serve dinner at 6 p.m. versus I will serve dinner at 6 p.m. Or I'm going to attend state college versus I will attend state college. So now the difference between those is so slight, I don't even know if we can parse the difference. But it's not always possible to interchange these two forms. For example, one example that I have here is if you're going to make a federal case out of it, just drop it. I don't want to hear about it anymore. Okay, if you're going to make a federal case out of it, and that's a bit of a idiomatic phrasing, but it's not really likely or even possible to say if you will make a federal case out of it. That just doesn't strike the ear as being correct, perhaps because of the force of its colloquial nature. Sometimes going to carries emotional force and conviction and intent, such as it'd be very likely to say, I'm going to propose to her tomorrow. Sounds quite different from saying, I will propose to her tomorrow. The second one, I will propose to her tomorrow, sounds a little bit more clinical, whereas I'm going to propose to her tomorrow seems to be more heartfelt. So it's a very slight difference, and sometimes one is more appropriate than another. However, in formal writing, business and academic, the will form, that is the modal auxiliary, the helping verb will, is much more common, and the going to is used very rarely. And just very briefly, there are a few other ways to speak about the future. One is Fred is about to speak, and so we see this over here. Fred is about to speak, and so that speaks to the immediacy of the future event. Or Fred is to speak, that is, he's scheduled to speak. We can also use some of the other modal auxiliaries, some of the other helping verbs, to express contingency future. So Fred may speak tonight, you see, so that we're speaking about the future, but we're not predicting it. It's not as firm as he will speak, or he should speak tonight. I'm expecting that he will, but I'm not quite sure. So these are other ways to speak about the future, to express the future. Now we get to the simple past tense, or be thankful for small favors, okay? Because the simple past is indeed very simple. It's simpler than the present tense, which has all these different forms and meanings that it can take. And it doesn't offer us the complexity of the future tense, in which we have a few different possibilities to express the future. The simple past is just that. It is simple, and it deals with the past tense. That is, it relates to a state or an event that took place in the past and is completed. It's all done. So now the length of time, the duration of time of the event can vary. So I can say, I heard a car backfire. So that's just a moment. That's just one moment, a fraction of a second. But the event is over. Or the dinosaurs ruled the earth for 100 million years. And so we have a great expansive time, much longer than that single clap of the or my hands, or of the imaginary car backfiring. You see, so it's 100 million years, but the event had a beginning and it had an end, and both of those are in the past. And so that's what the simple past deals with. That's what it expresses. Okay, so that's the simple past, and we'll talk more about different possibilities with the past tense as we go forward. We have another way to deal with some aspect of the past, to express something about an event that happened in the past, and that's what's called the present perfect. And as I say, well, maybe not perfect, but pretty darn good. Anyway, it's a grammar joke. Okay, that's what you get when you spend too much time reading about grammar. Anyway, but what this does, what the present perfect does, is it expresses an event or state of being that began in the past and moves in some undefinable way towards the present. So, for instance, I have walked my dog in the park for several years. That implies that I'm still doing it in some way or another, so it's an ongoing practice, as opposed to I walked my dog in the park for 7 years. So, I no longer do it. Maybe my dog, unfortunately, has passed away. So, which she hasn't. She still keeps me company. But anyway, now note the difference if you say something like Brick Swarthington threw 23 touchdowns this season. Where are we in the season? Well, if you're sensitive to such things, you'll know that the season is over. He threw 23 touchdowns. You see? So and if we go back to the definition of the simple past tense, we know that the event began and it ended. It has begun and it has ended. So we're looking at a complete event, his, having thrown the 23 touchdowns. If we say, however, something like Brick Swarthington has thrown 23 touchdowns this season, we have a sense that we're still in the middle of the season. So that's the difference between the present perfect and the simple past. The present perfect begins in the past and moves somehow towards and even includes the present time, whereas the simple past, just simply begins and ends. And I was going to say something like, you'd know the difference if you and I met and you ask me what I do, and I say, I have taught at the university for 10 years. You see, I have taught. So I'll ask you, if I said I have taught at the university for 10 years, would that communicate that I'm still teaching there? I think it would. Whereas if I said I taught at the university for 10 years, that would communicate that I once did that, but I no longer do so. And the taught, it could be 5 years ago, or it could be 20 years ago that I did that action. You see, so that's the difference between the simple present, the simple past and the present perfect. Now we come to what's called the past perfect. And this is a little bit more complicated because it deals with a couple different points of time inside the same sentence. Or if you count the implied present when we're speaking, then we're talking about 3 different points in time. But let me try to walk us through it, and I'll try to explain it. So, for instance, suppose you're describing a store manager. She arrives in the morning and the window is broken. She finds that the store window is broken. Okay, so when Mary arrived at the store in the morning, she saw that the window had been broken the night before. Okay, so now of course we have the implied present, and then we have the past tense. She arrived, the simple past, in an event that has begun and ended in the past, and then it had been broken. So now we're shifting to yet another time, sometime the night before. Remember, so she arrives, say at 8 a.m. in the morning, and sometime the night before, say at midnight, the window had been broken. That's what the past perfect does. It allows us to express 2 different points of time inside the same sentence, and to clarify the distinction between them. So please bear with me. I'm going to go back over the incident of Mary and the broken window yet one more time, and try to explain it by the use of this chart that's hanging over my head here. So now you notice over here, you'll see the present. That's the present time when you're telling the story. Okay, so that's the first location of time. Now, directly in the middle is the past. Mary arrived, she saw. Okay, so she arrived and she saw. Those are events that have been completed in the past, and that's kind of the central past point, the locating past point. Now, what the past perfect does, it allows us to refer to another time, a time previous to Mary's arriving. So if she arrived at 8 a.m. in the morning, okay, so that's what it says above. She arrived at 8 a.m. in the morning. She arrived and she saw. The past perfect allows us to say that sometime the night before, and we don't have to specify, we could, But sometime the night before, the window had been broken. Someone had broken the window. Okay, so that's what the past perfect does. It allows us to locate ourselves in the present and refer to an event in the past, and then refer to yet another event that happened further in the past. So I hope that clarifies the job of the past perfect. And it's a handy little device. Use it with care, because you can break and you can hurt yourself. So try it at home, but be careful. Now we're going to talk about the future perfect, which is another way to express time in English verbs. And it'll take some explaining to do, because it's a little intricate. For one reason, we don't use it that often. I can go through a whole term of students writing papers and I never see it. And I don't see it that much in other kinds of writing as well, but it's good to know about. We should know about it. Anyway, so it's not used frequently. It does something similar to the past perfect in that it gives us a double jump in time, but in a different way. And it does incorporate two different time periods, albeit future time periods. So in the next slide, I'm going to explain this more fully. Okay, so the future perfect is a way to talk about the time that is in the future for now, but is in the past from a reference point that we'll establish in the future, but will be in the past from that future point. Okay, so I know that's confusing, but let me just give you an example based upon an imaginary flight. Okay, so we're departing now on a plane. Okay, so we see that we're departing now on a plane. Okay, we have traveled 3,000 miles between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. So we're leaving for New York right now. Okay, and then between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. We have traveled 3,000 miles, and then at 8 p.m. we will arrive. So we will arrive. Okay, so but look how the sentence is formed. Our flight leaves now at 8 a.m., so that locates us, and you don't always have to say that, but I'm just doing that for the example. By the time we arrive in New York at 8 p.m., we will have traveled 3,000 miles. So it's that we will have traveled, which is the future perfect. You see, so it's locating us in the future. We're looking forward to the future event, 8 p.m., and our arrival. And when we arrive in New York at 8 p.m., we will have traveled 3,000 miles. Okay, so the traveling 3,000 miles is in the future from now, but it's in the past from our reference point that we're establishing at 8 p.m. Okay, so I hope that's clear. So before we conclude this section on verb tense, we must take a look at how we form the past tense and the past, what's called the participle form from verbs. Now, most of the verbs in English are regular. That is, they're very simple to form the past tense, and the participle form uses just simply add ed. So you take the verb walk, and so I walk, I walked, I have walked. Okay, so or the word answer, the verb answer. I answer, I answered, I have answered, I have answered. So always adding the ed, and I'm emphasizing the D on the end. Very often in colloquial English, we tend to slough over the hard consonant at the end, but it is there, and it has to be there in writing. Okay, so in the next slide, I'll show you a little test that you can use to validate this kind of information. Okay, so here we have something that's a little bit fun. It's called the WOG test. So WOG is a verb. It's an imaginary verb, so don't crash your brain cells or trying to figure out what it means, because it doesn't mean anything. It's just an imaginary word, but it illustrates how we automatically can form the regular verb. Okay, so if I gave you the word WOG and told you it was a verb and asked you to describe how you would communicate that you did it yesterday, that you did this action yesterday, you would say, well, I WOG'd. Okay, very, very simple. Add the ed. Or if you've been doing it for quite some time, where you say, I have walked. Okay, see? So you just very simply add the ed. So we can form the past tense and the participle form from even an unfamiliar word if we know that it's regular. Now, in the next couple slides, we'll discuss what happens when verbs are not regular, when they do not conform to any known pattern, and that's where we have a little bit of difficulty. So I've saved the hardest for last, the irregular verb. How to form the past tense from a verb that doesn't follow any regular pattern. That is, you cannot predict it. So if you remember our imaginary word wog, yesterday I wogged, or I have wogged. So those are very easy. Those verbs are very easy. But there's a category of verbs in English, that number 300, that don't follow any regular pattern. And you can see from the example that I have over here that you have words like think. Present tense, think, I think. Well, yesterday I thought, or I have thought. You see, so that follows a different pattern. It doesn't follow a regular pattern because you have a verb that rhymes with think, as in drink, and the past tense is drank. So how would you predict that? And the participle form is drunk. He has drunk too much. Okay, so there's no way to predict that. You have another word like rise. He rose up, or he has risen. Okay, so maybe you've heard that. Okay, but those are irregular. There's no predicting what form the past and the participle forms will take. And sometimes, even to confuse things further, you have words that don't change at all, like cut. So I cut carrots. Okay, or yesterday I cut myself. You see, so the word cut doesn't change at all between the present tense and the past tense. And then you even have some verbs that change the internal letters, the internal vowels, such as sit. I sit, but yesterday I sat, or I have sat. So generally speaking, there's no pattern to the irregular verbs. That's why they call them irregular. Okay, and there's no predicting what they are. And so one other note: if you apply the WOG test, if I gave you the verb WOG and told you it was irregular, you would not know how to express that you had done that yesterday. What would it be? Today I wog, yesterday I wag, I woggle, I wagon. I have no idea. You see, so it's impossible to predict. But that's why we call it irregular. It follows no regular pattern, and you have to learn these one by one. Now, in the text that accompanies this lesson, there is a list of the irregular verbs and their past tenses and their participle forms. You should take a look at that and become familiar with it. You don't necessarily have to remember each and every one, but you should become familiar with the list, and familiar enough that you can recognize that, well, first, the ones that you use most often, but just recognize the general idea of the irregular verb. So that's it for the verb tenses. We got through those. Okay, very good. Now we still have one other aspect of verbs to look at, and that's what's called subject-verb agreement, but we'll do that in the next presentation. But for now, please do review the material and take the quiz, study for the quiz. It's very important that you get the whole idea of verb tenses correct. One of the major mistakes that we can make in our writing is not being very certain and correct about this aspect of the English language. So I'll see you next lecture. Thank you very much. I certainly appreciate it.